a question, which is, thank you, Matt. What is an exceptional customer experience? A rather esoteric question, a rather sort of high level question, but what is an exceptional experience? And often the best way to understand this, Niels, is to go back and to think about in your own capacity, Rosh, when was the last time you received an exceptional, or dare I say, excuse the French, a really cuck experience as a customer? When was the last time you received either one of those things? Was it recently? Can someone, perhaps Justin or Craig, draw on something very recently where you as a customer received either something exceptional or something really, really poor? I can see Gareth has got one on the tip of his tongue that he wants to share. Craig has actually unmuted himself already, so he's ahead of the game. Craig, what do you got for us?
No, no, it's just asking you a question. I mean, like I'm trying to think when last. I think uh look, I cannot off the tip of my tongue actually say, I had exceptional service. I had good service, but not exceptional service. And I think that is somewhere, that essence or that ethic of proper service or satisfaction is lost in translation, is lost somewhere. You know
Okay,
what I mean?
Craig, you've answered
So
part of the
you know
question
what
there
mine was?
already, but while I've got you on unmute, I'm going to ask you in a second sense,
Did it
has
take
there
it?
been a time where you've been disappointed recently? A time where you've been disappointed as a customer? So not necessarily an exceptional one, but a poor one then.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I think, look, it's two ways because I know I'd like to think that I understand customer service, and I think it's because of the high expectation that I have. Immediately expect, the waitron or whoever serves me to have that same. So it's the little things that I think bugs me. My wife would say, "You're being petty." Then I'd be like, "No, it's not. It's the basics." You know what I mean? So. If I
Craig,
make an
you
example,
haven't Craig, you haven't done any media training, have you?
media training.
Yeah, because you've just done something that exactly every rugby player and sportsman does is they answer the question they want to answer, not the one that was asked to them. I'm just kidding, but I you jumped in there and you asked you're jumping two steps ahead, but I appreciate it. You wanted to add something there, which was
No, no, no. I think I'm sorry. I'm done there now.
you're alluding to the little things, but for the purpose of what we're going to talk about, I want to hear
Yeah.
a specific example from anyone who has either had a fantastic recent experience. And Craig, it sounds like you've probably more erred on the side of not being a little bit more disappointed than delighted recently. Is there anyone perhaps that has had an experience recently where either you were delighted or disappointed? And I'm asking for the ends of the spectrum here. Craig, maybe you can think of one in the interim as we continue the conversation. But Justin, any particular one that stands out for you? Ruan, I can see you thinking very deeply there about something which perhaps has happened recently. Justin has unmuted himself.
How's Rob?
Morning, Justin.
Yeah, look, we're fortunate enough to have quite a little gem of a restaurant in Jeffreys Bay, and when it comes to exceptional service, I don't think they ever let you down. And I mean, we went there, I was just my wife and I went there for our anniversary, and it's the treatment you get. They knew it was our anniversary. The little heart shell on the table made out. The owner sat with us. You could order off the menu, special, whatever we wanted. And just a little bit of extra to make your evening really good is what was needed. And I mean it's I think in the Eastern Cape might be a little bit rare, but it was pretty special.
Fantastic. Was that after you'd finished a set at Super Tubes, or did you go and do that subsequent to the dinner?
No, it would have been after, after eating all of that amount, I would have sunk out at Super Tubes.
100%. I can only attest to that. Sinking a lot myself. Thanks very much, Justin. I think you've highlighted a particular element of what I'd like to chat about as an introductory element, which is so, so important. And ladies and gents, what I am referring to there is a really simple but very important definition to understand what great experience is. And what we've got to appreciate as I look at all of these people on this call this morning, all of your beautiful faces, the reality is that our perception of success is all different, right? The reality of what is perfect service or an exceptional experience is different for every single person that I may ask on this call this morning. It is a subjective view of success. But one thing that is one principle rather that is universal, that is constant, is that every single time we receive something exceptional, it is because we have had our psychological and our emotional states increased. And what that simply means, guys, is that when you have an exceptional experience, the biochemicals research shows this, that we have an increase in things like dopamine. We are increased in our chemical balance, and because of that, we feel a sense of appreciation. We feel a sense of euphoria sometimes by being delighted through these experiences. We have an increase in our psychological and our emotional state. I want to give you a quick example of what I'm talking about. Any of you ever experienced the birth of a child or the loss of a loved one? Just by show of hands. Any of you ever experienced the birth of a child or the loss of a loved one? I think most people on this call, one of the two. Now, I'm going to venture to guess, Pierre, that that's probably a day in your life, either which way, that you're never going to forget. You're never going to forget that experience, that day. Yes or no? You could probably give me the specifics around what happened leading up to that. And the reason why I raise this, ladies and gents, is because that is the power of eliciting an emotional response to people. I'll bring it back to the fiscal power as well. But the reality is, ladies and gents, that when you elicit the right type of emotional response, for example, the birth of a child, unfortunately, or the loss of a loved one, we create an intangible and an unforgettable memory in the mind of the customer. That is why we have things like loyalty, Rosh. That's why people come back to certain experiences, like Justin gave us the example earlier. Something he noted in there, which is very important, is that an owner-run restaurant, an owner-run environment is generally always going to be a better experience. Why? Because that person understands the value of every single interaction. But what I want us to start to understand, ladies and gents, is the power and the importance of eliciting emotional responses from our customers, from our members, from our guests. Now, we don't have to go to the extent of people hugging us after every experience, but we need to understand, how do you move someone from one state of mind to the other? And we're going to unpack that as we go through today. So to get going, the first element that we're going to speak about in today's subject matter is what we call sourcing talent. Now, in the last 15 years of working with a multitude of different companies, one truth that I've come to understand is that if you have the wrong person in the right position, you have almost zero chance of making or creating exceptional customer experiences. And what I mean by that is some people are destined to create great experiences and other people are destined to do other great things, right? Some people are meant to be in hospitality, other people are not. And I think what I mean by that is when we look at how we source talent, we've got to think differently about where we find these fantastic individuals. One of the greatest challenges we find at the moment in the world that we operate in is that it's difficult to find really good people for hospitality. Since COVID, the research has shown that people have moved away from hospitality. A lot of people have moved into other industries, other positions, and finding good frontline talent sometimes requires us to look in places we wouldn't have thought. I have seen incredible people for hospitality working behind a petrol pump. I have seen incredible people in hospitality delivering things for 60-60, right? And on the spot, suggested to them that they contact someone at Club X because there's a position for them, right? We need to know what to look out for in these individuals, because when you find it, you can teach the person the things that they need to learn. You can teach them your menu. You can teach them about golf. You can teach them about being a marshal, a starter, but you have to start with the right fundamentals. Now, what fundamentals, Monique, am I talking about? What fundamentals are important to us to try and understand and elicit? A couple of things I want to share with you this morning. Number one, and this, by the way, ladies and gents, is taken from a gentleman, if you haven't heard of him before, called Danny Meyer. If you've ever heard of Danny Meyer, he's part of a fantastic company called the Union Square Hospitality Group. In fact, if any of you read Unreasonable Hospitality, he was the mentor to Will Guidara. So a phenomenal human being who has been very successful in the hospitality space. So he speaks of a couple of things that they look out for when they are hiring for people. And what he calls it is the hospitality quotient, right? Taken from IQ, they've created something called HQ. which is the hospitality quotient. It's the 50, what they call the 51 percenters. And this is what they're looking for in terms of the HQ component that will fit into their businesses, into their restaurants, into their establishments. The first one is when they're sitting on in an interview, they're looking for what they call kindness and optimism, right? Do they see this person being optimistic in the space that they operate in? Do they see them being kind to the people that they're working with? Now, this is a very basic trait, but ladies and gents, we've got a lot of people in hospitality, unfortunately, that we like to call I specialists. And I don't mean EYE, I mean I as in me, myself, and Irene. They're in it for them. You see those waiters who are just trying to earn the best tips. So they will hog the best tables. They will move towards the members that they know tip them the best, right? We've got to be very careful of looking for someone who's got that kindness and that optimism that's going to influence, guess what? The state of mind of the people around them. So that's number one. The second one is integrity. What they're looking for in these interviews, in these informal interviews with waiters, with barmen, etc., is they're looking for integrity. Is this person going to do the right thing? Most importantly, when nobody's watching, right? Do I need to micromanage this person, or is this person going to be an intrinsically motivated person? Two very, very important traits to start with: integrity and kindness and optimism. The third one, which I think is the most important, is what we call intellectual curiosity. And what this simply is, ladies and gents, if you've ever been served by someone, whether it's a starter, whether it's a cart barn attendant, whether it's a barista, a waiter, have you ever noticed that the people that you're most impressed by have one particular trait? And the trait is this: they ask you the most questions. Louise, they ask you the most questions. Now, Niels, why do you think that's such a critical part of finding people that are going to exceed your members and guests' expectations? Why is that such a critical part of their component of how they made up? Sorry, Niels, sorry to interrupt. I can't hear any audio from you. I don't know if it's just me or if anyone else can hear Niels.
Gorgeous. Finding you, my babe.
I don't think that's Niels. Niels, can you try again? Unfortunately, I'm not picking up any audio. Craig, can you try and answer while Niels tries to sort out his audio? Why do you think the propensity to ask questions is such a critical component of someone who's going to be an additive asset to your frontline team?
You're referring to the staff member asking the questions to the guests, right?
Correct.
Okay, so in my opinion, I think it's obviously to get more information out of the guest. It's sort of like creating by engaging a lot with them. You sort of like get this nice warm or welcoming atmosphere or engagement. I think also there's a lot, but I think it's also like what I like to think of proactive anticipation. So by engaging or asking questions, you get to understand what the guest wants, their needs, etc. And obviously you can tailor-make that experience now.
100%. Very well said, Craig. A lot of very, very good points there that you raised that start to what we call, I guess, customize the experience, make it more authentic. Do you guys remember getting that call? I'm sure you've had it many times, especially recently, where you get that call from the call center and the person phoning you and there's noise in the background, Karen, and there's someone going, good morning, sorry, is this Miss Karen Buerter speaking? And you reluctantly say, yes, it is. How can I help you? Immediately you're pissed off, right? Immediately you're irritated because the way that the person is bringing across the communication is as if they've done it for the 40th time today. Now, that all gets dispelled, it all gets prevented when you start with the most unique element of the conversation, which is getting data information from the person you're engaging with. And that is why, ladies and gents, intellectual curiosity, which is a fancy word for saying the propensity to want to find out the uniqueness of who's in front of you, is one of the most important traits. We are seeing it in retail today, believe this or not. The best salespeople today are actually the introverts, not the extroverts. The people that are selling the most today are the people that are the introverts, the people who are first curious and then speaking second, not the people that are speaking first. So Rosh, if I come to you and I say to you, and I meet you in the store and I say, look, these pair of Adidas shoes are the best for you without a shadow of a doubt. And I've got no data, no information to qualify what my thinking is. You're immediately going to be asking questions. How does he know that? Right? But if I start with a series of questions, understanding your context, understanding why you're even interested in the shoes, and then I suggest a solution, right? You're going to be far more likely to consider my recommendation. And it's the same thing that happens if you think about it. If you equate that to a waiter, if a waiter's asked you a few questions, if the starter's asked you a few questions on the first tee and then said, I think your line off the tee is probably a soft little cut, right? You're going to believe that person because they've gotten enough data in first. Believe it or not, you're more going to connect with that person as well because there's been a bit of back and forth to create that connection.
Yeah.
So ladies and gentlemen, sorry, Rush, Karen.
Sorry, Rob. And I do think, obviously, it creates a bit of trust between the customer and the salesperson. If the customer feels that the salesperson's carrying the customer's needs at heart and not just running towards his own targets, obviously, customers are clever, so they do figure out these little things. And I think as a salesperson, you'll have a lot more success by, like you said, first listening and trying to extract as much info from the customer and then actually providing him with what he wants and not what do you think he wants.
You hit the nail on the head, and you reminded me of another element, which is why it's so important, and that is, I don't know if you guys have noticed this, and we're as customers are guilty of this, is that today we are very checked out as customers. We're distracted by our phones. We're not often listening to what the server is saying, right? And by asking someone a question, and believe it or not, this is why I do this in these webinars, is I try and ask as many people questions as possible, not for the sake of getting through time, but if you might be asked a question, are you more likely to be conscious in this session than if you can sit through however long, be a passenger, and not have to contribute? Which avenue do you think you're going to be more conscious in? Far more likely the former, right? So the more conscious, and this is scary. So we mystery shop all the big shopping centers owned by Growth Point and Hyperop in South Africa. And what we've noticed through all the data sets of our mystery shopping exercises is that the stores that get the most spend, so what we call trading density in the store, the stores that get the most spend are the ones where customers are asked the most questions from the staff members. And the reason why that becomes a reality is because if I'm more conscious in the space, guess what? Guess what, Monique? I'm going to see more value in that space because I'm conscious in the space. If I am distracted by my phone, I could be anywhere and not realize the value of the space that I'm in. I might not even see a product that I'm interested in that I want to buy. Justin, does that make sense? Paul, does that resonate? We're in an age of what we call dramatic distraction. We've never been more distracted, yet we're in a physical space that we're pretending to be interested in. So part of our frontline team's job is to bring people back into the present, to bring people back into the here and now, to realize, hey, you're sitting with your friends, you're sitting with your loved ones. Be in the here and now. And guys, there's no one more guilty than me. I get shat on by my wife on a daily basis for checking an email when I should be being in the here and now. So this is as much self-therapy as it is telling everyone else to do the right thing. The last one out of the four, which we should always be looking out for when we are looking for talent, we're sitting in that interview, is what we call self-awareness. And the reason why self-awareness is so critical is because if you don't have the propensity to check yourself first to see, am I presenting myself in the right way? Am I coming across in the right way? We're going to miss a lot of opportunities when it comes to customer service. Self-awareness is the first pillar of what we call emotional intelligence. So when someone is very self-aware, it's easier for them to also self-regulate, which means to manage their own emotions. Right? Guys, if you've been in any form of hospitality, you know that managing your emotions is absolutely critical. All you need to think of, Rowan, is that difficult member, that difficult guest who ramps up the staff, who gets them pissed off, and they've got to regulate that as quickly as they possibly can. We've got to you sidetracked me, but there's a show on Netflix at the moment called White Lotus. If any of you are looking for a great show to understand what I've just been talking about, watch that show. You'll understand how guests can tip off staff that are serving them in fascinating different ways. But self-awareness, ladies and gents, a vitally important part of finding the right person. Now, you might be asking, well, how do we look for these traits? How do we find these traits in people that we're sitting and interviewing, right? Well, the reality is it is not easy, but the best way to do it, and here's a question for us all, including myself, is how many times do we as senior leaders take the opportunity, right, to be part of those frontline interviews? And I'm talking about for a waiter. I'm talking about for a barista. I'm talking about for those frontline positions that we often palm off to the F&B manager, or we palm off to the golf operations manager, etc. Right? The reality is, and if you're one of those managers, I would be encouraging you, if you're a golf ops manager, if you're an F&B manager, I would be encouraging you to pull in as many senior leaders into those interviews as possible. The question is why? Why is it so important that there's more than one person interviewing, even a waiter or a barista or a starter? Mr. Null, why do you think that's so important?
Hi, Rob. So, yeah, I think it's important from that perspective is that they've got the experience. Generally, if you're a GM of a big country club or golf club, you would have gone through that process from interviewing your frontline staff as an F&B manager or as an assistant restaurant manager or restaurant manager. So you'll eventually get the traits or understand the traits, and you've got the ability to then cascade that down to your own staff as you move down. It also gives you an opportunity to be in touch with your the basics, your frontline, your grassroots levels, and you look out for the people that you want to present your business in the right way.
Yeah, Craig. Yeah, a lot of. I suppose you've touched on the experience element there, which absolutely is a truth. And if I can bolt on one element to that, it's the reality of this. Every single person on this call today, including myself, has something called a blind spot, right? And a blind spot is not something that happens when you're driving your car. A blind spot is based on our personalities. And that, in other words, what we look for when we're interviewing people, very often a common mistake we all make is we look for traits that complement ourselves. We look for people that we can connect with, that we have a connection with. Now, the problem is that if one person is sitting on an interview, your blind spots are amplified. When you've got more than one person sitting on an interview, you actually you compensate for blind spots, Louise. Does that make sense? In other words, you leverage different perspectives of the people that are interviewing so that you can actually eliminate any bias in that interview, right? Because what we want, ladies and gents, is we want to make sure that that person fits in to the culture of the club, not the culture of the person doing the interview necessarily. So be very mindful. And if I go back to a client of ours historically that has done this incredibly well is Investec, the bank. Investec have been exceptional at how they interview people. Now, I know it's a different type of level of human being, etc., but the principle remains the same, is they will never hire someone at that company unless 5 or 6 people have interviewed that person. And they're not checking for physical competency or technical competency. They are checking for fit based on these principles that we've spoken about and a few others. So be mindful of the power of perspective in the room. Eliminate blind spots. Take the time, even as a senior leader in your club, ladies and gents, finding the right person is fiscally going to cost you a lot less than having to go through the process over and over and over again. If I can lean back on some personal experience, I come from a wine family, and I've grown up, around wine estates my whole life. My father is a winemaker, and one of the achievements that I'm very proud of that he achieved is in 2006. The winery at the time won the best tasting experience in the world. Now, the reason why I'm telling you the story is because those were students who worked at a university who achieved the best tasting experience in the world against people that are sommeliers, against people that are wine advisors as a career. And the reason why partly that the farm achieved that award was that in every single hire, for every single frontliner, the head of the business sat in on those interviews. For every single one. to sign off on making sure that the frontline, the representation of the company was 100% aligned to what the vision of the business was. So I can't emphasize enough, ladies and gents, the importance of top line management being part of these types of interviews. I think lastly, before we move on to the next one, it is important for us to understand that recruitment and sourcing talent is what we call an infinite game. It's not a finite game. And what I simply mean by that is we tend to ramp up recruitment when something has occurred where we need to fill a position. Whether it's through your website, whether it's through ongoing engagements with different channels, etc., see recruitment as an infinite game. In other words, you are always on the lookout. You are always looking for talent. You're always seeing where that next opportunity lies. Because like even a good succession plan, the more that you have back in the pipeline that you can reach to when the need comes, the easier that process becomes. Very, very important that we understand that. Before we move on, I want to ask one or two people a quick question, and again, some group learning opportunities here. When it comes to recruitment in your club at the moment, right? What are some of the approaches, the mentalities, good and bad, that you have found either work or don't work in your space? I'm gonna move to I'm gonna ask Gareth to start off with. Gareth, at Bryanston, what is the approach at the moment in terms of? I know you're in the golf department. What is your approach at the moment in terms of hiring new people? Is it one channel? Is it multi-channel? How do you start that, and how do you continue that process in a big environment that is Bryanston?
How's it, Rob? So yeah, with recruitment, I've got my guys that look for staff, especially with the golf operations. If we need anybody, we try to get the word around, and we try handpick almost the best candidates that we think are possible for the place. And then we do interviews. So I normally do my interview first with them before I take them through to the GM and the captain.
That's fine.
And then we kind of go from there, and we do training after that, and we do a week of training in various roles, especially if it's operations. We try to put them in each touch point. So we've broken up our operations in touch points, being the bag job, parts caddy, starter, marshal, halfway house, and we kind of keep them there for 2-3 days doing training specific on those touch points.
Okay. So in your first interview, is it one person doing that interview? Is it multiple people representing BCC, or how does that?
It's normally just myself. Normally just myself, and then if my operations manager is available, he will join us. But normally, majority of the time, it's just myself having an interview, getting the feel of the guy to see if it's even worth going the next step. So it's not normally a hard-on interview, if I can put it that way. We kind of just see who he is, touch base, and get a feel for him, and see the personality, and if he can handle some tough questions. And I try to do a little bit of role play with some conflict and stuff, and see how he takes it. But at Bryanston, obviously, being such a busy club, there's always a lot of side conflicts that you'll have to manage on a day. So that's important for our staff to know.
Cool. Right. But a word association there, I'm sure. Pierre, in an environment that is quite relatively on the outskirts, far away from big metropolis, etc., what's the strategy at Sandomir?
Yeah, Rob, I think it's similar. Depending on the department, we'll work through the CVs, compile the shortlist. Obviously, then we'll start interviewing and looking for certain personalities that would fit in with certain departments. For instance, if it's a chef and we're looking for a chef, we'll put them through their paces. We'll interview and perhaps send them into the kitchen and let them prepare a meal, and really do a nice pressure test with them, see how they'll handle that. Invite them back, let them prepare a menu, a short one. It's a decision that we make together as a team, whether it's myself and the food and beverage manager, or golf ops, or retail. And it comes back to what you said earlier. Try to avoid those blind spots. I think we've all got it, and I used to When a good couple of years ago, I would have probably made those appointments on my own. But you sort of learn as you go along that you need 2 or 3 opinions. And at the end of the day, you're making the best decision for the business and not necessarily for you. And appointing somebody that with the right attitude and that's coachable, I think, is more important than somebody with a really good CV at the end of the day.
100%. Yeah, 100%. Someone said recently that in today's world, CVs are the greatest work of fiction since, and then they mentioned an author, which I can't recall, but in some cases, it's quite true these days. CVs are not the level of integrity, perhaps, authenticity that they used to be. Yeah, ladies and gents, I think we're gonna move on, but as I think just to recap, the recruitment space is becoming more challenging. It's something which, depending on where you're based, is something which we've got to really continue to try and see as an infinite space, and look for those people in places where you think you might least find them, because it's incredible when you do see that bit of talent, what they can bring to your club. The second focus that I'm gonna touch on this morning is something which I think is one of the most untapped resources when it comes to creating exceptional customer experiences. And it's something that I stumbled upon about 5 years ago, and it's a psychological input called priming. So what's fascinating, and I'm gonna share some subject matter on it in a second, is I want to ask you one question, and I want you all to think about this, and I'm going to ask a few people to mention this for me. From the time that you woke up this morning until the time that you started sitting in on this webinar, how many points of stimulus do you think affected how you are thinking and behaving right now? Right? How many elements of stimulus have you exposed yourself to? So what am I talking about? Any form of music, any form of podcast, any form of conversation with another human being, any form of stimulus in traffic, anything that you've been exposed to from an external point of view, from the time you woke up this morning until right now. I'd like you to think about as many of those things as you possibly can for me. Justin? In J-Bay? How many elements of stimulus have you been exposed to since this morning, since you woke up? Justin, I don't know if you can hear me. Right, while I try and get hold of Justin, Monique, I'm going to come to you. Monique, how many points of stimulus can you recall from this morning since you woke up? All right, we don't have Monique yet. Rosh, I'm going to go back to you.
Yeah, so for me, it's been quite a productive morning in terms of activating those stimulus. So obviously, traffic is a factor in my life. I've got kids I need to get to school, so traffic every morning gets me nervous. And obviously, arriving to work, we've had a few challenges this morning, which we've meant to sort out. But we probably spoke to about 30 golfers this morning. All have different opinions on what's going on. So it's difficult to count how many, but I think in our business, there's probably close to 100 daily, that you'll run through, and that'll, get your nerves going or just put you off in terms of presenting yourself in a good customer space.
Got you. So a bit of traffic, a few members here and there, a couple of conversations, both good and bad. Interesting. Let's, Justin, I don't know if you're with me now, but out there in J-Bay, what stimulus do you have there?
Sorry, Rob, what's that?
I was asking in where you work and from home to work in the morning, how many different points of stimulus are you exposed to by the time you sit on a webinar like this?
Yeah, in St. Francis, not too many. You know, we might have to stop for the cows on the way here. That's the roadblock we have. Yeah, not too many. I mean, small towns. Look, I'm fortunate enough to be able to take the kids to school, which on a good morning is great. But you know, you might have a few more stimuli there when the boys are deciding school isn't the greatest thing, and then you get into work a little bit flustered, and then as Ross said, the usual staff challenges that come with unexpectedly. You know, you never get a good staff challenge in the morning, but yeah, we're a little bit more relaxed here in St. Francis Bay than the bigger cities, so
Okay.
we get to
Yeah.
on a normal day we get to start our days a bit more relaxed.
Cool. There's an upside to living in those more remote spaces, which I think you've highlighted there. I'm going to ask one more person, Paulie, Mr. Leishman. What has influenced you this morning since getting on this webinar?
Thanks, Rob. I must have quite chill changeover because that's quite nice for that. I think obviously so much you've woken up by your alarm. I went to gym this morning, which is a nice privilege I've got these days. So obviously traveling to gym and the traffic happening around, the radio on the way, everything that happens on the way to gym. Then you go through the gym experience and hope you're going to survive the class. And then obviously, getting back, I got on the treadmill when I got back and watched a show on the treadmill and then made breakfast, and then you sort of get yourself into a zone and start thinking about the session and what you're going to learn and things like that. So there's so much coming at you from all different sides.
Right. It sounds like you're living the good life now that you've got the. It's interesting how different our different versions of that were, and I want to play you a little clip of an experiment or two that have been done on this to show you the impact that this has on people's behavior, and then we're going to link this into the frontline customer service space. Take a listen to this.
Yeah.
How's it, Rob? Sorry, we haven't got sound on this one.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's just me or if anyone else can confirm that we can't hear anything.
I also can't hear.
Let me.
No sound at the moment.
Let me just check. It might.
No sound at the moment.
Gonna try that again, guys. Maddie, I don't know if you can engage or enable computer sound on your side.
I'm having a look at the settings on my side, Rob. Do you want to stop sharing and
any
then
change?
try No, there's still no sound. Do you want to maybe stop sharing and then reshare? Maybe that the
Can you
age-old
hear that,
switching
Maddie?
it on and switching it off. How's it, Rob? Can you hear me?
Sorry, Matt, could you hear the sound there?
No, it's there's still nothing on our side.
Seems like my audio is gone now.
We can hear you.
Sorry, there we go. Matt, could you hear the audio on the previous video?
No, nothing yet.
Not there.
Still can't hear anything on our side, yeah.
Okay, I'm not sure what the setting is, but it's obviously not playing the computer sound. I'll quickly tell you the gist of the story. In Brazil, what the government tried to do to alleviate poverty on the trains is that they started playing classical music on people's commutes to work in the morning. They started playing classical music. And what they found was there was not just a drop in how people were vandalizing trains and things like that. Crime everything that was negative actually started diminishing significantly, purely by the stimulus of the audio that they were hearing every day on their commute to work. And it got me thinking, which is really, really interesting, is how are we being primed? Because if you think about what I said right in the beginning, it's simply this. We cannot deliver great experiences. We cannot elevate other people's state of mind as a frontline team if we are not in the right state of mind as a team ourselves, right? It's impossible. It's impossible for us as a team to deliver exceptional experiences if the majority of the team are disappointed, irritated, frustrated. So part of the role of the people on this call this morning, and I cannot emphasize this enough, is we must always be thinking, how do we positively influence the state of the people that are taking care of the people, right? How do we positively influence the state of mind of the people that are taking care of the people? That should be one of your fundamentally most important roles that you're taking care of on a day-to-day basis. And it's not an easy thing, because if we consider the macro environment that we live in today, I want you for a moment to think about our frontline teams and what stimulus they go through to get to work every morning. Think about that for a second. What is the stimulus that these guys go through on a day-to-day basis before they get to work in the morning? How primed are they to deliver exceptional experiences? Yeah, and what do you think that looks like within your frontline team? What state are the guys finding themselves in by the time they get to work in the morning and need to deliver to your members and guests?
Yeah, look, on my side, I think generally, if you think about your frontline service workers, they come in with a taxi. They normally wake up in a house, that's not as privileged as ours. So I think it's very important to make sure that they prime for service, because by the time they get to work, their mornings and your mornings are very different. And I think it's a very thing that you need to be conscious about, in my opinion.
Yeah, very much so. And I think on a bit of a spectrum, depending on where individuals may live and what their family situations, etc., may be, but nonetheless, probably at some form of a deficit by the time they need to deliver delightment to your members and visitors. So what I did is I created a couple of tactics that we can think about to use to positively influence, I guess, that state of mind of the people that are literally at the front line of the experience. So first and foremost, this sounds very simple, guys, but it's something that I've noticed happens in the best organizations that we've worked with. And it's funny how the best always do the fundamentals best. And what I mean by this is calibrating the mindset through intentional greetings. It's amazing when you acknowledge someone in an intentional, authentic way, how it can reset their mental state for the day ahead. And I don't just mean walking past someone and sort of waving an arm and sort of half-heartedly sort of saying hello. I mean, engaging with them, looking them in the eye, using their name, and really sort of putting your energy and attention into acknowledging the presence of that person. Even better so is picking up on something that you've realized or known or found out about that person as they continue. People like Madiba were amazing at doing this with his security detail, and other people, people that I know who are fortunate to meet him, always remarked about the fact that when they got to meet him once and then met him a second time, they'd always pick up on something that he remembered about them in the previous engagement. So as senior leaders, as managers, it's so important that we calibrate this through engagement, through connecting the dots of that person, and fundamentally showing them that they are a human being in this space, that they're acknowledged for their individuality. That sense of recognition elevates that person's state 9 times out of 10. You'll notice this, and talk about commutes to work, by the way. This morning, on my kids, taking my kids to school, I noticed something profound, and that was I was let in to a queue in traffic by a very kind motorist. My behavior thereafter was, guess what? In the next adjoining lane, what did I do? I let someone in front of me. Any of you guys ever seen a movie called Butterfly Effect? If you watch the movie called Butterfly Effect, you'll notice that all of these habits and all of these efforts have a knock-on effect in what we do. So try as best as you can to be intentional about that recognition that we provide the staff with. Number two, and this is something we've noticed a couple of clients in the hospitality space taking real leads on with regard to dynamic messaging, and that is make your back of house areas as stimulating as possible, right? I don't just mean putting a poster up of the vision or mission or anything like that. There's nothing wrong with that. That's a great start. But we've got to think out the box in how we stimulate people through different mediums to think in a certain way, to operate, to have a certain philosophy towards our members and guests. So try and think out the box as to how you can use your back of house spaces to influence the way of thinking through audio, through visual, even through a podcast or whatever the case is, but give the opportunity to the team to calibrate that state through those different areas that they find themselves in on an ongoing basis. Thirdly, we're going to speak about something in a second, which is the evolution of how training has evolved over the last 10 to 15 years. But one thing I can strongly suggest is that what you want to develop for the people that are at the front line is you want to develop a stream of content for them to develop the right thinking and therefore develop the right behaviors. Not a once-off training opportunity, but a stream of content that gets delivered to them incrementally over time. Remember, ladies and gents, what we're trying to build here is we're trying to build an identity and then a habit. You cannot build an identity and then a habit of one instance of training or one stimulus. You've got to have sustained stimulus over time. Does that make sense, Raj? Gareth? Johan, does that make sense? We've got to have sustained stimulus over a period of time. If you go to the gym for 20 or for 3 hours today, and the next time you go is in 6 months, is there going to be any difference, Rihanna, from those 3 hours in 6 months' time? Absolutely not. But if you go to gym for 20 minutes every day for the next 6 months, there's going to be a sustained, marked difference. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to do the latter. We're trying to create stimulus sustained over a longer period of time. That's going to change identity. That's going to ultimately change habits. Number 4, guys, I cannot stress this enough. How us as leaders walk the floor, how us as leaders carry ourselves in the sight of our frontliners is everything. I can show you examples of waiters that have picked up the strangest habits because their floor manager, because their F&B manager had a certain way of walking the floor. So be incredibly mindful of the effect and the impact that the leaders have of the space, of the frontliners in that space. Number 5, always try and prioritize the behaviors that you would expect of your frontline team, that you do it themselves. I love to see from time to time, an F&B manager, a golf operations manager, getting stuck into the front line, showing the way that they would engage with members or guests. And remembering that difference also, ladies and gents, between a member experience and a guest experience. It's still something that we as an industry in this country are struggling to get right, is to differentiate between the member experience and that of the visitor experience. The two are fundamentally different. A visitor needs something very different from us than a member does. But it's not that you understand it. It's important that the frontliner understands that. And that is why intellectual curiosity is so important, because if you're willing to ask questions, like we mentioned earlier, if you're willing to ask questions, you're going to naturally understand the difference of those needs and be able to align to those. So guys, remember the importance of priming. Remember the importance that it is a sustained effort. Find innovative, creative ways of influencing the team on an ongoing basis. Right, moving on to number 3. Guys, this is something which I've seen some clubs move in the right direction, but there's still fantastic opportunity in what lies ahead in terms of technology. I'm going to share some best practices with you in a second, but how you can really, even for your frontline team, even your starters, your marshals, your waiters, etc., is create something which sets the right tone in the beginning. A few truths, a few realities about what tends to happen with onboarding and inductions in our spaces. Number 1, we generally prioritize inductions less the more we go down the organogram. So typically what you'll find is that your C-suite or your executive management, etc., get very clear inductions and onboardings, etc. And then the lower down the rungs we go, the less formalized that is. And that's a reality across many, many industries. Number two, the more junior the position, the more certainty that individual will require. And this is something fundamentally important that we've got to understand, is that when you've got a new person coming into a junior position in your club, they are yearning for certainty. They want to understand the specifics of what is expected of them. The biggest challenge we often face is that we deliver expectations through our lens, not through the lens of the person who's receiving it. And remember, that lens is vastly different to ours, right? We've got years of experience. We understand these things in and out organically. The person who's joining for the first time is looking like they're deer in a headlight kind of situation. They don't understand and they're looking for the specifics. So it's important that we understand that lens. Number three, new staff members are the most malleable in the first month of their employment. It's fascinating when you look at some companies, how they've created consistent customer experience through what they've done in the first month of that person being an employee. The first company that comes to mind for me that we've spent a lot of time with is Nespresso. You guys will know Nespresso, the company that does coffee machines, pods, etc. They are brilliant at how they stimulate a new employee in the first month. And if you're interested, I can share some of the methodologies that they've gone through, not in this webinar, but I can engage with you afterwards and we can look at that if you are interested. So what is very important for us to understand, and one of the current realities that I'd like to understand before I show you some of the best practices, is what is your current approach to onboarding? Now, if you don't have an onboarding system at all for frontliners, that's absolutely fine. But I'm keen to hear in the call this morning, how many of us have a formalized onboarding process? How many of us kind of do what we can with the time that we have? Craig, what's your approach at the moment to onboarding of frontline staff?
Yeah, I'll take it for my namesake, Mr. Hendricks.
I was actually waiting now.
Yeah, it was a toss-up between the two of us. Yeah, I'll jump in quickly, Rob, if you don't mind. Obviously, from our perspective, waiters, porters, sort of pot wash, scullery, your chefs on that side that join us, obviously go through an employee handbook. It's quite, shall I say, it gives you all the rules and the do's and the don'ts and all of that, which sometimes is important for us to ensure that the policy and the philosophy and, shall I say, the processes are important to get across to the employees, so they know what they can and can't do, and they've got a little written book that they can take home with. But I think equally important is the ability to walk around and introduce that person to all department heads, whether it's heads of department or whether it's even if it's say a porter or a caddy that's coming to join us, we'll take them around and introduce them to the staff in the kitchen, or we'll take them to the housekeepers, or we'll introduce them to the security guards as such. So everybody sees the new face, and even that person might not remember everybody will remember him, and at least try and welcome him into the throw as such. Ask him to ask questions. If there's any issues he has with his onboarding, does he have a problem with getting to work? How's his transport? How's mommy fitting into the whole new deal now? Is she happy with things? And just basically going a little bit deeper than just shall we say the process that happens at work, but just to ensure that the person is happy with the job that they've taken. Some of them have now had to travel greater distances, particularly us here at Simbithi. We're not exactly in town. We have to pull people from the Mshanga area or Durban or further north. So it's important to ensure that the people that have joined you are comfortable with the space that they're in. And you're right, it generally is for the staff that are in the lower positions. They are now traveling further than, say, your new F&B manager or your new golf operations manager or your new sports manager. They're able to move into the neighborhood, and as such are relatively easy to commute. But those staff that are coming from great distance generally need a bit more hand-holding.
Yeah, Yeah, 100%. A lot of those intentions that you mentioned there around taking people around, I think are wonderful gestures and really help individuals to feel part of the team. The reality being, when we want to do them, when we need to do them, rather often there's something else that often may get in the way, or Murphy's Law. We just don't have the time to do it for every single person. I think that might be fair to say. So hence, and Craig, Craig, I'll come to you right now, but the question then becomes, how do we systemize that in some way, right, so that it's still authentic and it serves that purpose, but it can be done even if we're busy. Craig, go for it.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to add, obviously, with regards to the onboarding, Helderberg Village is quite a massive, estate or property, and you've got your various different departments. So HR obviously would deal a lot with that, but from a departmental manager point of view, so if the staff come in, the onboarding obviously then falls upon me or the supervisor of the department. But and again, just to add what you were saying now, that sometimes it does get difficult to show them the entire property. So I think, in this case, the most important aspect of the onboarding is focused on that person. Let's say, for example, the clubhouse restaurant, to focus the onboarding in this particular area, but then also trying to make time to show them the different areas. Again, like I said, it's massive, it's big. There's about 760 dwelling units here alone. Obviously not wanting to show them all of it though, but at least those specific areas that staff member might, mix with, or the department, is to show them obviously where they are.
Sure.
Yeah.
It's a big elephant to chew when it comes to properties of that size and the complexity that comes with it. Again, adding to what other Craig was saying, is that it becomes a difficult thing to try and physically do without a system in place. So to start, guys, with, I think, understanding how we make onboarding as effective as possible is really firstly understanding the reality that A, you get transactional onboarding, and B, you get transformative onboarding. Transactional onboarding is the do's and don'ts that Craig Null mentioned earlier, the handbook, the things that policies and procedures, etc. And those things are important. We cannot forego those. But remember today, ladies and gents, we're talking about exceptional customer experiences. No policies and procedures handbook, and I say this with the greatest of respect, is ever going to create exceptional experiences for anyone, right? Why? Because you've got to be in a transformative mindset to create exceptional experiences. So what do I mean by this? Well, let's look at a couple of things that are going to help to create the transformative element of the onboarding process. Number one is, what do we stand for as a club, right? What is our purpose statement? Why are we even here? Why do we even exist? Now, there might be a vision, a mission, and a couple of other things that are part of the club's identity. The problem for the frontliner, Niels, is that a frontliner, a waiter, a starter, when they read that language, it makes very little sense to them, right? When you speak in highfalutin terms about what the vision of the club is, it's very difficult for the frontliner to translate that into behavior, something that they understand, right? So what I'm saying here is, from a club's purpose statement, it is something incredibly simple. It's behaviorally based, and it is something that they can understand in terms of what they can do on a day-to-day basis in their position, whether they're a waiter, whether they're a starter, a course marshal, etc. But that needs to be the starting point, because that is our identity. And remember, habits flow from identity. So it is very important. And here's a little yardstick for each and every one of us. If I were to come to your club in 3 months' time, and I went to anyone, including the outsourced security guard at the front gates, and I said, what is the purpose of this club? The golden answer would be that every single person who is a frontliner at that club could give me the same, or anyone else could give them the same answer, right? That is the win, because then you've got aligned identity. Now, that might sound simple, but in the execution, it is not simple, ladies and gents, because you've got to repeat that, and you've got to repeat it, and you've got to repeat it. We've got a company called Growth Point. You guys will know the property company that we work with. They do inductions, right? Not for senior management, down to the frontline teams. They do inductions twice a year. It doesn't matter if you've been there for 2 years or you've been there for 20 years. You do inductions twice every single year. The second one is key personnel of the club. Both Craigs alluded to this very briefly, but ladies and gents, it is so important that people create a sense of place by understanding who are the people, the humans that make up this club, right? So what technology is allowing us to do today, and it doesn't cost very much, is allowing us through video to create fantastic resources that form part of the induction process, part of the onboarding process, where new staff members can actually learn about the key personnel within the club. What makes them tick? What do they like? What do they dislike? Not too formal, just getting to know the human being. What position do they fill, and how do they make a difference at the club? Again, if you're interested in that framework, we're doing a lot of this content creation now. It's really cool to see the kind of content that we can build and create for new clubs, or for new staff that are entering the club space and trying to find their place in it. Number 3, and this is so important, ladies and gents, for the position that the person is holding, is what are the service level expectations for that particular department, right? What are the service level expectations for that particular department? In other words, if I'm a starter and I'm coming into the environment, what is the guideline? What is the framework by which I need to be able to measure myself against, right? If I'm a waiter, what is the level of product knowledge that I need to know about my menu before I start on the floor, right? What is this approach to upselling in our F&B department? And guys, the more specific we start, the more specific the results are going to be. But what typically happens is that a staff member will latch on to another staff member. They'll pick up the habits of that particular waiter or starter, and then it'll be a continuation of whatever the current reality is. So if we want to be truly world-class, what we've got to be able to do is we've got to be able to set up something that allows the person to understand what are those key moments of truth, not just on a customer journey map level, but then what does that actually mean in terms of the visuals of that? How do I execute that type of greeting? How do I execute that type of engagement with a visitor versus a member on the first tee? How do I engage with that difficult golfer as a course marshal, right? What is my how-to make that a reality? And guys, what I strongly encourage you to do is, as senior managers, get stuck into the detail of these things. If I show you places like Troon, some of you will know about the Troon Management Company, the global golf management company. Our very first client in South Africa in 2010 was Pearl Valley, when it was being managed by Troon Golf. I received, on the first week of being a supplier to them, the Troon Golf Bible, which was like a set of standards from the moment that you arrived at the golf club till the moment that you left. Now, when I say to you, it was mind-blowingly specific. That is not even doing it justice. And the reason why they went into that, and to be honest with you, it wasn't attainable for African standards at the time. But the reality was that they'd rather be too specific than too vague. And that's a principle I think we should all lean into. Rather be too specific than too vague. Because if you're too vague, people are just going to do whatever they think they should do. And that's where inconsistency creeps in. You've got to be careful of that. So try and be specific in those expectations. And again, if you want some kind of a framework to look at and where we can start with that, give me a shot and I'll happily share those frameworks with you. The next one is people want to know how they can grow in the space, right? When people come into a business, one of the most important questions we've seen through research is people want to know, what are the learning opportunities that are going to be presented to me in this space? In your onboarding, you want to provide them with that roadmap, right? Rob, as a waiter, you're going to be learning about food, you're going to be learning about wine, you're going to be learning about whiskeys, you're going to be learning about different types of beers and the production, you're going to be learning about hard skills, etc., right? We want to get people to understand what does that exciting roadmap look like for their development, because if we get them into that state, they're going to be more progressive, more opportunistic. Second last one is, yes, we do have to have the club policies and procedures, as Craig mentioned. So we want to have those in there because that creates the framework against what is right and what is wrong. And then the last one, which we don't often think about for frontliners, but how are we going to measure success for the frontliner? And guys, here's the game changer, I think, for a lot of us, in creating the consistency, and I'm going to speak about this right at the end of the session, is how do we measure for success even for a frontliner? Because remember, the more we measure for success, the more that person knows where they stand. And the more that they know where they stand, the more that they can calibrate and move to the place where they are aligned to your expectations. So I just want to reiterate the fact before we carry on that onboardings and inductions are not just for, they're not just for new staff. They're for people in the company that need to have a little refresh. And if you've got a lot of staff that have been there for a long period of time, I strongly encourage you, Ron, to think about having a reinduction process, right? Think about starting a new project where we reinduct people that have been there for a long period of time. We recalibrate our purpose. We recalibrate why we're there and what we're there to do, even at the frontline level. Guys, as an aside, most of you, a lot of you have outsourced providers. A lot of you have people, security companies, cleaning companies, etc., that form part of your brand, as it were, right? You also want to think about when those people come in as outsourced providers, is onboarding those providers, having an onboarding platform for them to be able to feel part of the business, right? If you've got onboarding sessions, bring the security team in, bring the cleaning team into those sessions if you can, even bit by bit, so that they feel part of the team. You're going to find better output from those staff, which, if you speak to visitors, a lot of visitors don't care they don't even know if the staff is outsourced or in-house. They see them as part of the value proposition. Next one, very quickly, ladies and gents, is what we call developing the supervisors. If I've learned one thing in the last 15 years that will enhance your customer experience without a shadow of a doubt, it is going to be the quality of your floor management. And when I say floor management in F&B, I mean your floor manager, your duty manager. When I talk about golf operations, I mean the golf operations supervisor, the person overseeing the people at the front line. And one of the realities of how important this position is how these people get to that position. So what typically has happened is that you'll find your best waiter or your best starter or your best marshal gets pushed up into that position. They get elevated, they get promoted into that managerial position. But the difficulty of that is that the skill set required to be the best waiter or the best starter and the skill set required to be the best manager are completely different, entirely different. In other words, you often find that the best waiter, who's now a manager, wishes he or she could go back to being the best waiter, because they got the most pride and enjoyment out of that direct engagement, because that's what they're good at.
And the tips.
Never a truer word spoken. When you're that close to the tips, you miss them when you no longer have them, no doubt. But the reality is, guys, is we've got to choose horses for courses. I would love to play you this video, which I don't think is going to work because of the sound issue. I will send it in the slide pack. But Simon Sinek speaks beautifully about this concept of how we develop leaders for our teams. So how do we take someone from being a great waiter to being an exceptional manager if they're the right person, and what does that actually look like? Again, I will share that video with you because it really couples nicely with what we're talking about. But suffice to say, if you look at it and we decode it ever so slightly, if you look at the left-hand column, you see a couple of the things that are important skills for a supervisory or leadership position. Things like team communication and delegation, the ability to get an expectation across in a way that people can hear and listen to it. The importance of being able to delegate rather than being a glorified waiter, right? It is very frustrating when you find a supervisor falling into a glorified waiter position instead of being able to delegate, because that's the quickest way your customer service actually starts to drop. The ability to have the right administrative skills, the rostering, the administration, even the right emotional intelligence to regulate oneself. The worst thing, ladies and gents, that I see in both golf operations and in food and beverage is when I see a leader, a supervisor, not being able to regulate their own emotions. Because then the frontline team have no chance of being able to do it themselves. They're following that lead. So it's important that you find someone who's got a strong emotional intelligence to be able to regulate effectively. Conflict resolution being very important as well. If you contrast that across, The people that are brilliant at the front line are the people that are fantastic doers. They're the people who can be exuberant when they need to be. They're people that can ask the right questions when they have to. They're people that can sell themselves through confidence, through that understanding of who they are, and also have the right hard skills to be able to deliver that exceptional plate of food, to be able to deliver that monologue on the first tee that they need to do. So just be mindful of the fact that when we're developing supervisors, we need to be conscious of the fact that there's a skill set for one and there's a skill set for the other. It doesn't mean your best way to your best starter has to be the supervisor. Right, number 5, and this is, I want to share very quickly with you when we're speaking about improving customer experience and improving the front line, is how important training has changed over the last 10 to 15 years. And I want you to think about how you can integrate this change in philosophy and approach into your space so that you can leverage training by not deleveraging your operation. Because one of the main reasons why we don't do enough training, or we don't have enough of a training culture in our space, is often because of operational demands. We need staff to be present for the operation to occur. So one of the advents that have come in over the last, I'd say 10 to 15 years, as I said, is this concept of a micro-learning culture. And what micro-learning simply is it's the ability to create a learning opportunity while the operation is still happening. So, for example, having bite-sized content, right, that people can digest, understand, take in, but not having to sit for an hour to be able to understand the skill or the competency and then having to move on. It's 15, 20 minutes at the most. It's a learned skill, it's accountable, and then they carry on. It's focused on one particular area or subject matter. It's not a whole bunch of stuff together. It's flexible delivery. It's dynamic. It's moving. It's not static. It's not a textbook. It's in time for what is needed in the moment. So, for example, if you've just done staff appraisals and you've noted that your course marshals and your front of house and your starters don't have enough knowledge of agronomy or the course, then that can be a focused micro-learning skill that you implement there and then for that purpose. The byproduct of this is, of course, improved retention. Because if we focus finitely on a specific task or competency, that person can hone in on that, understand it, and then take it back into the workplace. And that's the power of micro-learning. We are finding that long-form learning today, ladies and gents, is very ineffective. People don't have the bandwidth, they don't have the time, and they don't have the propensity to want to learn reams and reams of content at the frontline level. So I strongly encourage you, again, to find a way to implement the micro-learning approach. And there's 2 ways you do it. Number 1 is through an external provider, right? Someone who comes in and is able to curate that content and deliver it, one or the other or both. Or secondly, you develop the skill in-house, where you're able to do in-house micro sessions with your team. And ideally, you want to do both, but if you can do one or the other, it is a great start. So when we're building a micro-learning culture, these are the things that we want to start focusing on as a point of departure. These are the things that we want to start understanding, especially with our frontline teams. And if we can get these subject matter points over the line, you're going to start finding immediate improvements on your customer service levels. Number 1, all right, we've spoken about this already in previous sections, but your communication skill is absolutely vital. I see a lot of people achieving good results on their product knowledge tests, for example, but not being able to communicate that knowledge to a member versus a visitor. It is vitally important that we develop the acumen, the skill behind what we call active listening, the ability to create a conversational dynamic with someone and elicit that information and use it to be able to engage with that person over on a repeat basis. Secondly is the emotional intelligence trend at the moment, which is obviously very high, and that's the ability to respond to different member types, different visitor types. Ladies and gents, we have to seek people that have a propensity to want to develop emotional intelligence. It is vitally important in the expectations of today's customer. The customer of today expects to be understood on an emotional level, and therefore we have to have people that have a ceiling that are able to develop in those areas. It's not based on an IQ, it is based on an HQ. Number 3 is the problem-solving quotient. And ladies and gents, this is the inclination to want to own a problem, to lean into the problem-solving process, These are people that are intrinsically motivated, but we can develop that skill through the right type of micro learning, is the importance of leaning into that problem solving process. Second last one is the cultural integration. So there's a lot of micro learning happening at the moment in terms of cultural integration. And simply how that's happening is people are unpacking different elements of their culture on an incremental basis. So revisiting different points of the identity, what it means, for example, to have attention to detail, what it means to be proactive in our engagement with visitors versus members. What is our difference of approach between a visitor and a member, et cetera, et cetera. And then the last one from a trend point of view is obviously our technical knowledge. So we want to have people that are confident because they have the requisite technical knowledge. If you've got a waiter standing in front of a visitor or member who cannot open a bottle of wine and they're trying their best to do it, right? They're trying their best, but they don't have the physical hard skill to do it. It's going to be difficult for them. It's going to diminish their confidence. And it's also going to be difficult and awkward for the customer. So we want to make sure that through these elements, we're developing that confidence that we need to have. Another way to improve the customer experience when it comes to the micro learning element is what we call developing time-based finite goals. And simply what I mean by this, and this has worked beautifully for a restaurant group that we work with, to get customer service levels up from one shift to the next. The biggest danger that we have when people are working within an organization for too long a period of time is that they start becoming clock watchers. They start waiting for the end of shift, and all their attention is on just getting through the shift. Now, we want to reverse that. We don't want people to be watching clocks. We want people to be working towards some kind of a finite goal in that shift. So to give this some kind of meat and substance, what I did, and this is just for illustration purposes, you can take this and you can calibrate this to whatever you want to do. But what we've done for some clients is we've gone, okay, we've got a food and beverage frontline operation, we've got a golf operations frontline operation. Let's create a finite goal for a 4-week period that every frontline staff member is actively understanding and working towards. So whether that's, and again, just random examples, frontline team, we've got a new wine list. The goal is, let's try and sell 5 bottles of a new wine on the wine list within week 1, right? It's tangible, it's measurable, it's understood, right? And then we can create the learning behind that. But when it's understood and when it's applied to, the focus shifts from watching the clock to going, okay, well, there's a leaderboard behind this. I don't want to be down on the leaderboard. I want to win this thing. Let me focus my attention on that. Now, some of you are thinking, yes, but then that's going to create individuals who are just in it for themselves. Of course, we create the context around that to know that you only do it in a way that serves your team, that doesn't take away from your team. And so on and so forth, creating these measurable goals, creating these focus areas that align behavior to an opportunistic focus for the team. And making sure that our supervisory team are revisiting these little micro goals on a day-to-day basis, celebrating great behaviors that are in line with these micro goals. You never want a waiter, a starter, etc., to be literally just trying to get through a shift, because that behavior is going to result in poor customer service. So again, calibrating that focus, that stimulus that allows them to focus on what's most important. And then number 6, ladies and gents, which is one of the things which creates, not only reinforces the right thing, but creates the right habit. And I said to you earlier, what we want to be able to try and do is we really want to be able to give even the frontliners the right type of feedback to know where they stand. A lot of you have heard me talk about the 5 human needs many times. The first human need is certainty. And the more frontline you go, the more certainty they need. So in order to create the right feedback culture, what we need to try and create is not to evaluate frontliners on KPIs, because KPIs are not relevant for a frontliner. They don't make sense, and it doesn't make sense in terms of what they do on a day-to-day basis. But where you can evaluate them is on competency levels, on behavioral competencies. So what we've created for our clients, just as an example of this, is we have a competency framework for every frontline position. And simply what it is it is the indicator, the item that is relevant to their position. It's a description around what that is. And then the person has either exceeded the expectation, they've met the expectation, or they've fallen below the expectation. Now, how does this all work? It's very simple. The supervisor for that frontliner does this on a quarterly basis. They evaluate every single staff member on a quarterly basis. Once they've evaluated, done the evaluation, they sit with that staff member and they go through those results. And the reason why that's effective is because when they've gone through that process, that individual then has certainty and understanding of where they're doing well. So they get celebrated for that. And then they know where to improve on, right? So if it's a starter who, for example, has struggled to engage with members like they do visitors, they know they need to work on understanding different members. They can work less on improving their visitor engagement, so on and so forth. But these are very, very important areas that help us to bring the person back into the present, understand and focus on what does a win look like and what is most important. So my question to you is, what does feedback currently look like in your environment? Is it more ad hoc? Is it detailed? And again, I'm asking for the frontliner. I'm not asking for the senior positions because that can take a different form. But how specific are we when it comes to the frontline team of how we are giving them feedback? Niels, what's your take on it? How specific or how structured are you guys? Do you think there's opportunity for you to create a bit more intentionalism, a bit more structure behind that? Oh, I forgot your audio is not working. My apologies. Still not working. Etienne, from you guys' side?
Yeah, well, we get a lot of feedback, both formally and informally, from our members sometimes, from our waiters sometimes. But I don't get to see the formal feedback sheets. We just get to hear about that in meetings. So I think Craig will be in a better position to give feedback on that.
Okay, so Etienne, you're referring there to the feedback that comes from the customer, from the member, the visitor, etc., which is obviously important, and that's important to take in as a line item in terms of how we define our success. So what I'm referring to here is how we actually, from a management point of view, evaluate our frontline teams of people that historically, typically, don't have structured evaluations to what they do. So that's what I'm curious about. Is there perhaps in your guys' environment a structured way of that, or is it more ad hoc, haphazard at this stage?
No, we have a structured approach to it, and we basically do the whole KPI thing as well. I know on the homeowners association side, where we sit individually with every team member and go through everything that they need to do, what's the feedback from customers, etc., how we see them, or our perception of how they are doing their job. There's many things that come into that, but it just gives them the confidence and feedback to know that they are valued and that we appreciate their efforts. And if there's anything we need or expect from them to work on, we will communicate with them on that. So I think the open communication is basically one of our strengths, and also there's also that the expectation that anybody can come and see us at any time if they have an issue or want some advice from us.
Fantastic. That sounds like you guys are nicely down the road there. Any advice for the others on the call this morning in terms of having gone through that process, tips, tactics that kind of help streamline that process, whether it's you or Craig?
Maybe, Rob, if I can jump in from Etienne's side of things, what also works well for us is we've just recently done a survey to our residents around our restaurant, and we asked sort of the 10 most widely asked questions in a survey report, and that report is then shared with the staff to tell them what the results are. So in a way, it's not an evaluation that comes directly from management and is possibly seen in a different light. The actual evaluation is coming from your customer base and is now giving you perhaps a more realistic understanding of what you're doing from a frontliner's perspective in terms of their job, serving tables, looking after customers, and sharing that knowledge, saying, listen, our service isn't great. These are the areas we don't know. We don't know our knowledge. We don't know our wine list, the new menu items that have come on, say, for example, that are specials. They don't know the basic ingredients. Those type of things are coming through. And we can share that. Then it also gives us an opportunity to now evaluate the staff on the customers are seeing, and it helps us put together, a better training and development in those areas that the customers are seeing that perhaps we don't as managers see as often as possibly we should.
Yeah, always a great initiative. I'm curious the results that you get versus what your hypothesis is as to what those might be. Are they often aligned, or are there some interesting developments or learnings that come out of those exercises?
Well, it's actually quite strange because one of the things that we looked at was obviously the menu option, and in terms of the food varieties actually came out as an area that we thought wouldn't be considered, and there were certain things like your food portions are too big. They're not seasonal specials you're putting out, and you could have a better variety. What I mean by that is our menu is massive, and you have the same menu that we've basically produced for the last 2 years. And even though it's huge in terms of its variety, people are saying it's the same old, same old. We want more specials. We want healthier options. We want seasonality on ingredients. And so we've taken that as an example, and through that evaluation, we've given that information to the chefs, and they've been challenged to come up with what our residents and what our customers are looking for. And as we look at it now, so we are developing our menu, and that now gets trained with our staff, and hopefully, waiting times, because the bigger your menu is, the longer your waiting time is going to be at the end of the day. So, yeah, I think through those evaluations from our resident base has definitely helped our staff base.
Fantastic. I'm sure you've also realized the fact that different personalities take feedback in different ways. Some are open to feedback. I always find it humorous talking about giving the chefs feedback, because that can land in one of two different ways, as you know. Do you find that there's an open and willingness to absorb that and take it in the right way, or is it sometimes met with a bit of hesitancy?
I've worked with some amazing chefs in my life. I worked with a Syrian tank commander that had a bunch of keys on his belt, and every time something was wrong, he'd throw it across the kitchen at somebody, but that was the Middle East for you. No, I think our chefs, we have 2 executive chefs. They are very open to suggestions and are quite willing to learn and develop and understand that. So, the EQ of your staff nowadays, as you retermed it or termed it again, the hospitality IQ, it has to be high in that space to be able to develop. But yeah, I think we're quite fortunate in that space. They're very talented, so they can adapt quite easily.
It is very interesting where the chef, and especially in the chef space, where things have gone from a kitchen culture point of view over, I suppose, the last decade, where, as you alluded to, the pan throwing and the sort of very hierarchical environment was sort of commonplace. And it seems like the junior chefs coming through the ranks these days are just not willing to tolerate that, and obviously necessitated a change of heart from the senior guys. So it's probably not easy for them because they're in between generations, I guess, but you obviously have to go that direction, whether it's feedback or just managing the kitchen, I guess. But Craig, thanks very much. That's some great insight, and I think it's obviously borne fruit. Any other suggestions that you wanted to share, or I think learnings around your guys' approach that's worthy just for anyone else to hear, or have you covered it in your initial response? Okay, I'll take it as covered. Gideon, just from your side, any contrast to what was said there in terms of your guys' approach to the feedback mechanism?
I think from our side, it's basically the same. I mean, hospitality is hospitality. And I think where we're lacking maybe on our side is it's more after the fact approach. So when we do get feedback from the guests, then we go back to the waiters or the chefs or whatever, and we tell them, listen, this is the feedback that we got. So I think we need to be more proactive in knowing what our guests' expectations are and then meeting and exceeding those expectations. And whether it's negative or positive feedback, we need to ensure that it gets, because sometimes when it's negative feedback, as a management team, we will run to the waiter or the chef and we will tell them, listen, you did this wrong, you did this wrong, you did this wrong, and this is what the guests are complaining about. But when it's positive feedback, then as a management team, we will rather keep the positive feedback to ourselves and not necessarily give it over to the actual staff member who achieved that feedback. And I think that's very important because that's how we're going to build our teams, is by making sure that, yes, we address the negative, but we also celebrate the positive. And I think that's very important in uplifting your team. And then by doing this, and we've got this goal that we're working to, we want to go from good to great. And by doing this and by celebrating the positives, we strive to be even better at what we already doing good, but we need to do it better and we need to exceed our guest expectations and not only meet our guest expectations.
Yeah, Gideon, I think you raised such a valuable point there for all of us to remember, in that, when you recognize a great behavior, you essentially, from a scientific point of view, elicit dopamine in that person's chemical balance. And that means that they feel good chemically about what they've done. And the natural human tendency is to seek that again. So you're actually creating an opportunity for that person to understand chemically what behavior makes them feel good, if that makes sense. So it's so critically important that what you've just said, we actually physically do and not just keep it to ourselves. Will Guidara speaks very well in his book, Unreasonable Hospitality, about, he says, we often go to the tapes, in inverted commas, to find out what we did wrong. We don't go to the tapes to find out what we did right. And I think reinforcing the habits, the behaviors that we want out of our teams is a lot to do with what you've just highlighted there. So thank you for raising that. I think it's a very valid point. Rosh, any approach from your guys' side that you kind of buy into from a feedback point of view?
Thanks, Rob. Yeah, Gideon's actually our food and beverage manager, so he gave you a bit of insight from his side. From a club side, we do quite a lot of surveys, especially for residents and members. So obviously extracting a lot of info from that. And as Gideon said, whether it be good or bad, we do discuss it with the staff and we try and action plans to obviously battle anything that we feel don't align with our company. And as he mentioned, we have obviously a goal strategy, which is good to great. And obviously our boss enforces us to get this message across to our lower level staff so they understand the bigger picture of where the company is going, and it helps them to react in different ways if they understand what the actual goal is for the company to achieve. So yeah, very much thank you, Gideon. I think answered most of the question.
Fantastic. Yeah, I love that idea of good to great. I forget the author's name who penned a fantastic book in that respect. Jim Collins. Well done, sir. But I think you've hit the nail on the head in the sense that, if I'm a waiter, if I'm a starter, I mean, it's literally a case of two columns. Good is X and great is Y in terms of the physical application of the job. And I think that's where the work lies for us as leaders, is to define that as clearly as possible. We make the assumption that sometimes that's naturally understood. And I think depending on the person, they need that framework to really understand it and lean into it. So yeah, fantastic. I love that. I love the simplicity of that, which is very powerful. Mr. Van Vieren, I know that there's a lot of feedback loops that happen at San Lemire when you're not sinking birdies. What does that look like in your guys' space?
Yeah, Rob, I think, again, with our flagship events, we obviously run surveys. Feedback that we get back, I like to incorporate it into training sessions. I take it into a room, we discuss what we do well, and we look at ways that how we can improve on things that we're potentially not doing so well, and we try and get it to end up in a productive session. And I think that's worked really well. Obviously, you'll have one-on-ones if you feel that there's an issue that needs to be addressed. And if there's a compliment addressed to an individual, you bring that up and you celebrate it. And I think that's worked really well. It's gotten us together as a team. We're not singling anybody out. We talk about how we can get better as a team. And you think about it and you talk about, if you watch tape, the Springboks don't just watch tape when they've played badly. They also watch it when they've played really well. So I think it's important to celebrate, both of those. But I like to be productive and work it into a nice training session, close the club for the morning, run a session, discuss what needs to be discussed, have a bit of fun with it, and then we move on. And I think generally that's worked really well for us.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that constructive kind of framework helps for the retention of the knowledge as well. Thanks very much, Pierre. Ladies and gents, we are going to start concluding with what I asked right at the beginning of today's session, which is very simply a wonderful quote that I take from Robin Sharma, which is, "Ideation without execution is a fool's game," which simply says that we can ideate for as long as we like, but it's what we actually put into practice that actually bears fruit. So I'm curious, I'm appreciative before the fact of what you have penned as one or two things that you would like to implement, enhance, slightly change, whatever the change might be in your space that you might maybe take a note of today. That's going to move the needle ever so slightly in your particular space. So I'm going to ask... I'm just trying to see who's jumping at the bit. Paulie, you don't have a specific club anymore. I know you've probably written down many things, but maybe not specific to a club. So, is there anything while the others are thinking? Is there anything you've penned down that will help us remind something, or remember something important of today?
Thanks, Rob. Yeah, it actually brought me back to. I actually went and looked at a presentation from one of the American conferences, and I'm happy to share the staff induction program of Baltimore Country Club. And it is just mind-blowing that the extent they go to really onboard staff and that. And obviously in other parts of the world, they've got a bigger problem with just trying to retain staff and that. So the onboarding is incredibly important and making them part of the team. But I think the 3 points that I made a note of was more attention to the hiring practices. So really getting more stuck into that. So I think, too often we just filling a gap quickly because we're stuck in the operations and we need somebody to do stuff. So really making more of a point of that. The idea of making the back of house more stimulating and really developing our staff areas, I think often very underwhelming in most of our clubs. It's areas in our clubs where we wouldn't want our members generally to see in that. So trying to upgrade those areas. And then obviously back to the onboarding of that, to make your onboarding mind-blowing. So not just another tick box. I know at Branson we had quite a nice little scorecard thing, or a little checklist, and you had to meet with certain people in the club and things like that. So you go through a bit of a process to really make it truly memorable and mind-blowing, and that just not important. Make it really special and memorable in that. I think one thing that I heard people mention ages ago was, when somebody leaves the organization, they normally get a really nice farewell gift and things like that. And it'd be quite great to actually start somebody off with the welcome gift and that, to make it really special.
Yeah, I'd be interested to see what the American clubs sort of buy into from a delivery point of view with the onboarding, but there's often no shortage of subject matter you can focus on. It's more a case of knowing what's most important, I guess. But thanks, Paulie. Always insightful hearing from you. Mr. Hendrickse, any points that you've jotted down today that are you taking home with?
Yeah, actually, I made I made a lot of notes here. And funny enough, it was actually just a question that I wanted to ask, or just maybe I missed it from if you might have mentioned it or so. We were talking about onboarding, and one of your slides actually made a note that says onboarding is not just for new staff, and which I think I agree with everything you said, but and this is the part where I don't know if you maybe have mentioned it, but onboarding for old staff or current staff that's been here for quite some time, how often is it that we actually go through the letter of employment or the contract? I mean, ask me, that's been at Helderberg Village now for almost 10 years. What is in my letter of employment? I'm going to say, I don't know, give it to me, let me read through it again. You know what I mean? The do's and the don'ts, or whatever the case might be. That's one of the things that obviously stood out for me. But what I liked about the last topic though, when we talked about feedback, I think I'm a bit fortunate here because here at Helderberg Village we are mostly events driven. Yeah, we have a la carte. Yes, we've got a coffee shop that's acts as a halfway house also. But our villagers who frequent us most are our regular feedback people. So, I'd get a compliment or a complaint on the day, and whether, the supervisor here or myself here, obviously, on the day, we rectify it. We go back and we say, okay, what has happened? Let's fix it right here and there. So I made some notes here in terms of feedback. Obviously, new staff, 3-month probation, they get feedback on the monthly basis. One of my colleagues mentioned KPIs. Of course, we're supposed to do it on a monthly basis for certain positions. Obviously, not our frontliners. So it's like twice a year we do like our KPIs, which I'm pretty sure with my colleagues would agree is standard. I did mention obviously feedback is more in the form of verbal as opposed to surveys. Look, don't get me wrong, I think surveys is a good thing. I prefer more the verbal because the survey is always at where I work, it's something that will get months down the line. And, obviously for us now to go figure out what has happened is sort of like lost in translation. So the verbal feedback for me is obviously one of the big things that I obviously prefer. If I just look, that's basically that in my notes.
I just want to quickly touch on that first point you raised, which is the reinduction. It's frightening through research to realize how few people have any idea what's actually in their job description. And simply what I mean by that is that the need for reinduction is greater in most industries than what we actually think. Just because someone's been at a company for X quantum doesn't mean that they still buy into the culture, that they still buy into what we're trying to achieve as a business. And that they understand where we're going in terms of evolution. I mean, you guys, I don't need to tell you about evolution and change in the club industry and where things have moved to. I think it's more important now than ever that we reinduct and we recalibrate on what we're actually trying to do. More for the sake of if someone doesn't agree, if someone has a contention around something, then lean into that. We haven't spoken about a conflict today or disagreement, but I have noticed in environments that we work in is that disagreement is one of the most powerful catalysts for getting people to buy into something. And that might sound counterintuitive, but it 100% is, because if someone disagrees, they care enough to raise the point. And allowing that to take allowing the person to feel like they can disagree and argue a point for principle is very, very powerful. Historically, managers didn't allow people to do that because it was my way or the highway. Today, we're trying to create this consciousness. We're trying to get people to feel part of something. And if I feel strongly about something, I'm going to raise the point if I have a different viewpoint on it. So I strongly encourage, especially in feedback sessions. Craig, you said that you prefer the verbal, right? You can couple the written, the human feedback, the academic side with the human side and make it a really robust system. But I know that customer feedback is great, but I can tell you now through personal experience, the human wants to hear from their superior. They want to hear how they are faring in the minds of their superior, because when they hear that, they have certainty as to where they stand. That is very much more ad hoc when it comes from other sources, as important as they might be. So yeah, thank you, Craig. Thank you, Craig, for that. I think it's some very valuable insights that you've again brought brought forward. We are running out of time. Is there anyone else who had a good point that they wrote down that would like to raise before we start ending off? I see Rowan is pensively waiting to share his. Jadine, I haven't heard much from you today. Monique or Chris, any of you guys want to share any points? Obviously, big listeners. The camera's been off, so I assume that you've collected a lot of the dots, or would I be mistaken?
Sorry, Rob, is it fine if I jump in here?
Please, by all means, Gideon.
Yeah, I've had the privilege to work for, I come out of a hotel background, so this is the first golf club that I work for. But I mean, like I said earlier, hospitality is hospitality. And I've worked for Starwood Hotels and Resorts some time ago. I mean, they owned and managed 1,500 hotels worldwide. So it's a big American company. And one thing that we had to do yearly, whether you're the GM or the F&B manager or the waiter or the porter or housekeeper or whoever, you had to go through service culture training yearly. So that's an induction thing that you start. So before you even go on the floor, you go through the service culture training, and then yearly you need to make sure that you go for that refresher every year. And it's exactly the same training, but it's just that mindset that we're all working towards the same goal and that we're all here to provide a service to our customer. And I mean, the benefit of that, and that's worldwide. I mean, that's 1,500 hotels. All employees go through the same training yearly. And the benefit of that was, and obviously a golf club is a little bit different, is that if you as a guest let's say you stayed at the Sheraton in Pretoria today, if you go to the Sheraton in London next week, you experience the same service. And that's the goal that we wanted. And as well, another thing that I think that maybe, and I don't know, I'm talking under correction here, saying this is the first golf club I'm working, is we are guest relations managers. And their only goal was to collect information from guests staying with us, and in this instance, eating with us, playing with us, and know what their expectations are. And then next time that guest or the member comes to you, you not only meet that expectation because you know what the expectations is, you exceed that expectation. And I think that's maybe something that in the golf experience and the golf club experience, we're lacking. And I'm talking under correction here, like I said. But I mean simple things like I know my GM loves cappuccino. So in the morning when he comes in, make sure the cappuccino is on his desk. And the same with the guest. We know we are in a privileged situation. We're a residential golf club. So we know our residents and we know our golfers by now, and we know what they expect. And I mean, if we get that feedback from a guest relations manager, a waiter, or whatever, and we know what our guests expect. So when the guest comes here the next time, we not only give him what he expects, but we exceed that. And I think that's something that we all can work on.
Gideon, thank you very much. The background that you come from and the service culture aspect that you mentioned, I'm going to respectfully disagree with you and say I think it's even more important in golf clubs. And the reason why I say that is because if you think about how complex a structure of a golf club is, you've got food and beverage, you've got golf operations, you've got security, you've got finance, you've got marketing, you've got all these different entities. I can give you an example of someone who had worked as a waiter and a golf club for 8 years. They'd never been onto the 18th green of that golf club.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Now you're trying to create a connected experience where a member or visitor sees one linear experience. It's not going to happen. If I go onto a first tee and the starter says to me, look forward to seeing Haley at halfway, I know I'm in for a good round or a good experience because those people have taken the time to connect the dots in the different entities. Not the halfway, but mentioning the person's name who's on duty. That's a connected experience. And I think that happens through what you've just mentioned, is recalibrating, reinvesting in those principles that make us who we are. So just to respectfully, and I think you might agree that, it's as important, if not more important, in the spaces that we operate in. So thank you. Thanks, Gideon, for sharing that and that background as well. Ladies and gents, that brings us to the end of our session today. As always, I hope that it has been sufficiently informative for you. I hope that you've taken something out of it. If you weren't able to contribute today, my apologies for that, but please do feel free to get in touch. I want to end off just by saying that, as an industry, a rising tide lifts all boats. And I think there's been amazing things that have happened in this industry over the last couple of years to shift the standards, to elevate on and on and on. And I think the more of these engagements that we have and do and share, the more that tends to happen. So thank you for all of your contributions. It's greatly appreciated as always. Maddie, over to you, sir.
Rob, thank you very much. I think we can all agree that was hugely insightful and informative. Guys, just a bit of housekeeping for the end here. The register and feedback form has been posted in the chat box. That correction with the compulsory questions has been updated and fixed, so you shouldn't have any roadblocks there. And then just thank you very much to GolfRSA for sponsoring this webinar and making it possible. It's awesome getting everybody in the room and yeah, like echoing what Rob said, just uplifting the trajectory of the golf industry and the club industry. So thank you very much to GolfRSA. And then thank you, Rob. Awesome hearing from you. And yeah, looking forward to seeing you next week.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks, Maddie. Thanks to GolfRSA as well. Yeah, fantastic to have them sponsoring these. Have a great day, ladies and gents. Have a great week, and hopefully see you all very soon.
Thank you.
Come on, everybody. Cheers.
Bye.
Yes.
Thanks so much.
Say, want het eerst ik.
Mm-hmm.